Well, hello everyone. Welcome. I am the mostly harmless obelisk, transmitting this stream directly into your minds. And I'd like to make an announcement. The Suppression Bureau tried to stop my Twitch channel by destroying my home back in July. But I am back. I've got a new place, I've settled in, I'm doing fine, and I am fine enough to start streaming again. I'd like to thank every single person who sent me their well wishes since July, and especially to those who allowed me to vent some steam. It was a pretty difficult time up until recently, but yes. For those who are new, or for whose memories are full of holes like a sieve, I am the eldritch streamer who lives both here in the realm of the dreams and the hidden places of the world. I mainly stream horror-themed games like Darkest Dungeon and World of Horror. I love reading all sorts of classic literature and poems. And most of what I've read on stream is Poe and H.P. Lovecraft, but I will be branching out very soon. Thank you for stopping by and chatting, Blind Frog. Your Rune and Summertime, thank you for coming in. Thank you so much. Speaking of the things I will be reading, let me pull up my stream schedule. Today, we are doing Shadow over Innsmouth, which is perhaps tied for the most popular of the H.P. Lovecraft stories. Most popular in the sense of most read and most referenced by other works. On Tuesday, tomorrow at 8 p.m., we shall be doing Darkest Dungeon. We will be continuing the game we started, assuming the save file isn't corrupt. Too many things have been corrupted or destroyed since the events that have happened in these past couple months. But hopefully that's on the Steam cloud, so I'll be fine. On Thursday, I will be playing World of Horror at 8 p.m. I unlocked a fair number of things that I'd like to try out in that game off screen, so I'd like to show those off. On Friday, at 10 p.m., we will be continuing Shadow over Innsmouth. Likely, we will not be finishing the story in these two streams, but I will put in an effort to do so. On Saturday, at 5 p.m., I will be reading one of the many short stories in the game Arknight. Arknight is a gacha game for those of you who are unfamiliar. Normally, I am not a fan of gacha, however, Arknight, and to a somewhat lesser extent, Reverse 1999, and also definitely Limbus Company, are games that I both play and highly recommend for their story content. And I've heard good things about the story Children of Ursus. So that is what we'll be doing Saturday. Sunday and Wednesday I'll be resting, and hopefully by Saturday I will have the new schedule in. Now, let's see. I wanted to... Sorry, right before stream, my computer crashed, which is perhaps not a portent of good things, but wanted to put a link in the chat for my Discord. I'll do that once everything's loaded up. In the meantime, let's see. Right, so after the schedule, I wanted to go over a couple things for where I would like to be taking this channel. Unfortunately, Your Rune, thank you for doing the command Discord. I think that link might be old. It might be something that has to be refreshed. I'll click on it and double check. But yes, where do I want to take this channel? A very big thing I've been trying to think about over this past month. Of course, I would like to be growing the channel as much as I can. I do like the idea of this being a somewhat smaller community, but of more people in here to chat with. And I'd like to be posting more things to YouTube. What I'd like to do most with that is using my YouTube channel, which I do have, as more of a place to store clips or longer segments from my videos on Twitch, rather than making specific YouTube content. Although that's not something I might not do in the future. We'll see. Let's see. I'd also like to branch out and start doing more literature content. I'd like to turn this into somewhat primarily a reading channel. But both of literature, like I've been doing, but also like I am going to be doing with Arc Knights. I'd like to read things from video games. Words are eluding me. Visual novels are on the table. I'd like to do more stories from Arc Knights. Stuff from Project Moon is a definite. I definitely will be doing Library of Ruina reading streams, Limbus Company, that sort of thing. Yes, I have Discord open now. I don't know why it took so long. I just need to pull an invite link. Yes, definitely. So the one I just posted now is the new invite link. I will try and update that. Blind Frog says, I love visual novel streams. What sort of visual novels do you typically play, Blind Frog? I've played quite a number recently, but probably my top favorites for the Safe Baroque variety is, I would definitely have to say Steins Gate, of course, and the two of the other games by the same people who did that, Chaos Head and Chaos Child. Disco Elysium. I would not call Disco Elysium a visual novel, but that is a super based game. I love Disco Elysium. Summertime says Valhalla. Yes, Valhalla's right on the edge of being a visual novel or not. Either way, I love Valhalla. Thank you. Summertime says, cute as hell emotes. They were done by my wife, actually, Yorarune, who's in the chat with us right now, but I think she's working in the other room in her office, so I don't know if she's actually listening or just occasionally chatting on her phone or something. Thank you. I know she'd appreciate that. All right. Let's take a very brief break. I'll roll some ads. Everyone use that time to go grab yourself a drink, go to the bathroom, or whatever else. And we will be back with the story. Hello, everyone. What just happened? Okay. That was very strange. When I was setting things up to enter the reading room, background was a black void, and when I selected it in OBS, it said no file selected. So I just kind of assumed it wasn't working. Um, I'm very glad it is. Crisis avoided. Well then, uh, welcome to my reading room. Those of you who have never been here before. Today we will be reading one of the great classics of the Lovecraftian horror genre, named, of course, after the author H.P. Lovecraft. Shadow over Innsmouth is, as I mentioned previously, perhaps the most famous of his works, along with Call of Cthulhu. Uh, this one, once you have read it, or if you've read it before, it really is what I would say 40% of people, when they're making a Lovecraft reference, it's from this book. Or when they're incorporating the idea of Eldritch horror, it is something related to Shadow over Innsmouth in some way. And, of course, for those who have never been here with us when reading, let's say, sensitive topics such as the works of H.P. Lovecraft, I will, of course, be reading it in its entirety, with one exception, that being Rats in the Walls, which will have a word redacted. You know the one if you know. I'm not going to mince words. If you are unaware somehow, H.P. Lovecraft was not a good person, not even for his time. Sorry, the size of the screen, I keep trying to adjust it so it's easier for you to read. We're not going to pass over that. And I will be dissecting certain elements of this book at the very end as a sort of rundown of both historical matters that are mentioned as well as interpretations of mine. But that's enough preamble. Let's get into this. The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft. Unspeakable monstrousness overhangs the crumbling, stench-cursed town of Innsmouth, and folks there had somehow got out of the idea of dying. There is a translator's note we will be skipping. During the winter of 1927 to 28, federal government officials made a strange and secret investigation of certain conditions in the ancient Massachusetts seaport of Innsmouth. The public first learned of it in February, when a vast series of raids and arrests occurred, followed by the deliberate burning and dynamiting, under suitable precautions, of an enormous number of crumbling, worm-eaten, and supposedly empty houses along the abandoned waterfront. Uninquiring souls let this occurrence pass as one of the major clashes in a spasmodic war on liquor. Keener news followers, however, wondered at the prodigious number of arrests and abnormally large force of men used in making them, and the secrecy surrounding the disposal of the prisoners. No trials or even definite charges were reported, nor were any of the captors seen thereafter in the regular jails of the nation. There were vague statements about diseases and concentration camps, and later about disposal in various naval and military prisons, but nothing positive ever developed. Complaints from many liberal organizations were met with long, confidential discussions, and representatives were taken on trips to certain camps and prisons. As a result, these societies became surprisingly passive and reticent. Newspaper men were harder to manage, but seemed largely to cooperate with the government in the end. Only one paper, a tabloid, always discounted because of its wild policy, mentioned the deep diving submarine that discharged torpedoes downward in the marine abyss just beyond Devil's Reef. That item, gathered by chance and a haunt of sailors, seemed indeed rather far-fetched, since the low, black reef lies a full mile and a half out from Innsmouth harbor. But at last I am going to defy the ban on speech about this thing. Results, I am certain, are so thorough that no public harm save a shock of repulsion could ever occur from a hinting of what was found by those horrified raiders at Innsmouth. For my contact with this affair has been closer than that of any other layman, and I have carried away impressions which are yet to drive me to drastic measures. Before I continue, how's the audio? I'm currently using new equipment since my microphone was smashed during the event in July. I was hoping everything was set up properly. Summertime says audio is great. Thank you. Oh, and Blind Frog had mentioned played 2064 read-only memories. I'm unfamiliar with that one. I vaguely actually have heard of it, but I know very little of it. Oh, how is aside from my voice? Oh, hold on. Oops. I was supposed to have a soundtrack going on this whole time. There we go. Can you hear it and the fireplace sounds and my voice well? Yes, they're working excellent. It seems the computer crashing messed with some of my settings, perhaps. Yes, this song, I believe, is from the game Book of Hours. Let's see. It was I who fled frantically out of Innsmouth in the early morning hours of July 16th, 1927, and whose frightened appeals to government inquiry and action brought on the whole reported episode. I was willing enough to stay mute while the affair was fresh and uncertain, but now that it is an old story with public interest and curiosity gone, I have an odd craving to whisper about the few frightful hours in that ill-rumored and evilly shadowed seaport of death and blasphemous abnormality. I never heard of Innsmouth till the day before I saw it for the first and, so far, last time. I was celebrating my coming of age by a tour of New England, sightseeing, antiquarian, and genealogical, and planned to go out directly from ancient Newbury to Arkham, whence my mother's family had derived. I had no car, but was traveling by train, trolley, and motor coach, always seeking the cheapest possible route. In Newburyport, they told me that the steam train was the next thing to take to Arkham, and it was only at the station ticket office, when I demurred at the high fare, that I learned about Innsmouth. The stout, shrewd-faced agent, whose speech showed him to be no local man, but sympathetic towards my effort at economy, and made a suggestion that none of my other informants had offered. "You could take that old bus, I suppose," he said with some certain hesitation. But it ain't through much of hereabout. It goes through Innsmouth. You must have heard about that. So the people don't like it. Run by an Innsmouth fellow, Joe Sargent, but never gets any customs from here, or Arkham either, I guess. Leaves the square, front of Hammond's drugstore at 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. Unless they've changed lately. Seems like a terrible rattle trap. I've never been on it. That was the first I'd ever heard of shadowed Innsmouth. Any reference to a town not shown on common maps or listed in recent guidebooks would have interested me. And the agent's old manner of illusion roused something like curiosity. So I asked the agent to tell me something about it. He was very deliberate and spoke with an air of feeling slightly superior when he said, Innsmouth? Well, it's a queer kind of town down by the mouth of Minnuxent. Used to be almost a city, quite a port before the War of 1812, but all gone to pieces in the last 100 years or so. No railroad now. B&M never went through there. Branch line from Rowley was given up years ago. More empty houses than there are people, I guess. And no businesses to speak of except fishing and lobstering. Everybody trades mostly either here or in Arkham or Ipswich. Once they had quite a few mills, but nothing left now except one gold refinery running on the leanest kind of part-time. That refinery, though, used to be a big thing. The old man Marsh who runs it. Must be richer, of course. This queer old duck, though, and stinks mighty close in his home, and sticks mighty close in his home. He's supposed to develop some skin disease or deformity late in life that makes him keep out of sight. Grandson of Captain Obed Marsh founded the business. His mother seemed to have been some kind of foreigner. They say South Sea Islander, so everybody raised Cain when he married an Ipswich girl 50 years ago. They always do that about Innsmouth people. Folk here and about always try to cover up when any Innsmouth blood they have in them, but Marsh's children and grandchildren look just like anyone else as far as I can see. I've had them pointed out here or there to me, though, come to think of it. The elder children don't seem to be around lately. Never saw the old man. And why is everyone so down on Innsmouth? Well, young fellow, you mustn't take too much stock in what people say around here. They're hard to get started, but once they do get started, they never let up. They've been telling things about Innsmouth, whispering mostly, for the last 100 years, I guess. And I gather they're more scared than anything else. Some of the stories would have made you laugh about old Captain Marsh driving bargains with the devil and bringing the imps out of hell to live in Innsmouth. Or about some kind of devil worship and awful sacrifice and some people near the wharves, kind that stumbled around in 1845 or thereabout. But I've come from Parton, Vermont. That kind of story don't go down with me. You ought to hear, though, what some people some of the old timers tell about the Black Reef off the coast. Devil Reef, they call it. It's well above the water a good part of the time and never much below it, but you could that you could hardly call it an island. The story is that there's a whole legion of devils been sometimes on that reef, sprawled out or darting in and out of some kind of caves near the top. It's a rugged, uneven thing a good bit over a mile out. Towards the end of shipping days, sailors used to make big detours just to avoid it. That is, sailors that don't hail from Innsmouth. One of the things that they had against old Captain Marsh was that he was supposed to land on it sometimes at night when the tide was right. Maybe he did, for I dare say the rock formation was interesting. And it's just barely possible he was looking for pirate loot, maybe finding it. There was talk of his dealing with demons there. Fact is, I guess, on the whole, it was really the captain that gave the bad reputation to the reef. That was before the big epidemic of 1846, when over half the folks of Innsmouth was carried off. They never did quite figure out what the trouble was. It was probably some foreign kind of disease brought from China or somewhere by the shipping. Surely was bad enough there. There was riots all over, and all sorts of ghastly doings that I don't believe ever got outside of town. And it left the place in an awful shape. Never came back. There can't be more than 300 or 400 people living there now. But the real thing behind the way folks feel is simply race prejudice. I don't say I'm blaming them for holding it. I hate those Innsmouth folk myself. And I won't care to go to their town. Suppose you know, though. I can see you're a Westerner by your talk. What a lot of us New England ships used to have to do with queer ports in Africa, Asia, South Seas, and everywhere else. What queer kinds of people they sometimes brought back with them. You've probably heard of the Salem man who came home with a Chinese wife, and maybe you know there's a bunch of Fiji Islanders somewhere around Cape Cod. Now, there must be something like that back of the Innsmouth people. The place always was badly cut off from the rest of the country by marshes and creeks. And we can't be sure about the ins and outs of the matter, but it's pretty clear that old Captain Marsh must have brought home some old specimens when he had all 3 of his ships in commission back in the 20s and 30s. Certainly is a strange kind of streak about Innsmouth folk today. I don't know how to explain it, but it's sorta makes you crawl. You'll notice a little, and Sergeant, if you take his bus. Some of them have a queer narrow head and flat noses and bulgy starry eyes that never seem to shut. And their skin ain't quite right. Rough and scrabbly, and the sides of their necks are all shiveled or creased up. Got bald too, very young. Their older fellows look the worst. Fact is, I don't believe I've ever seen an old chap of that kind. Guess they must die of looking in the glass. Animals hate 'em. Used to have a lot of horse trouble before autos came in. Nobody can ever keep track of those people. State school officials and census men have a devil of a time. You can bet that prying strangers aren't welcome around Innsmouth. I've heard personally of more'n business or government men that's disappeared there. There's loose talk of one who went crazy and is out at Devon's now. They must have fixed up some awful scare for that fella. That's why I don't go out at night if I were you. I've never been there and no wish to go, but I guess a daytime trip couldn't hurt you. Even though the people hereabout will advise you to not make it. If you're just sightseeing and looking for an old-time stuff, Innsmouth might be quite a place for you. And so I spent part of that evening at Newburyport Public Library looking up data about Innsmouth. The Essex County historians on the library shelves had very little to say except that the town was founded in 1643, noted for shipbuilding before the Revolution, seat of great marine prosperity in the early 19th century, and later a minor factory center using the Minuxet as power. The epidemic and riots of 1846 were sparsely treated as they formed to discredit the country. Oof. Taking a break for water. Make sure to stay hydrated there, everyone. You know, it's pretty strange. Hold on a sec. I need to step away from the computer for a moment. You know, it's the darndest thing. I went to a old bookstore that is near my new apartment recently and bought a copy of A Lurking Fear and Other Stories. I have it here with me. It's a little compilation of H.P. Lovecraft stories. Okay, so the one that we're reading, by intention, by the way, is the one from the original comic books. Well, it's like half comic book, half magazine. I believe it was called Strange Tales. That ran back in the 20s that H.P. Lovecraft posted a lot of his stories to. So the one we're reading is the actual original Shadow over Innsmouth. Oh boy. The one that I picked up at the bookstore, it's like a old used one. A good amount of what I just read is redacted out of it. Interesting. Yorarune asks, no, was this one translated by someone else? No. It was originally in English. Always has been. Well, that's interesting. All right, let's get back to it. References to decline were few, though the significance of the latter record was unmistakable. After the Civil War, all industrial life was confined to the Marsh Refining Company, and the marketing of gold ingots formed the only remaining bit of major commerce aside from the eternal fishing. Most interesting of all was a glancing reference to the strange jewelry vaguely associated with Innsmouth. It had evidently impressed the whole countryside more than a little, for mention was made of specimens in the Museum of Miskatonic University at Arkham, and in the display room of the Newburyport Historical Society. I resolved to see the local specimen, said to be a large, queerly proportioned thing, evidently meant for a tiara, if it could possibly be arranged. The librarian gave me a note of introduction to the curator at the society, a Miss Anna Tilton, who lived nearby, and after a brief explanation, that gentlewoman was kind enough to pilot me to the closed building, since the hour was not outrageously late. The collection was a notable one indeed, but in my present mood, I had eyes for nothing but the bizarre object, which glistened in a corner cupboard above the electric lights. It took no excessive sensitiveness to beauty to make me literally gasp at the strange, unearthly splendor of the alien, opulent fantasy that rested there on the purple velvet cushion. The longer I looked, the more the thing fascinated me, and in this fascination there was a curiously disturbing element, hardly to be classified or accounted for. I decided that I was the pure otherworldly quality. It was the pure otherworldly quality of the art which made me uneasy. It was as if the workmanship were that of another planet. The patterns all hinted of remote secrets in unimaginable abysses in time and space. The monotonously aquatic nature of the reefs became almost sinister. Among these reliefs were fabulous monsters of abhorrent grotesqueness and malignity, wholly primal and awesomely ancestral. At times, I fancied that every contour of these blasphemous fish frogs was overflowing with the ultimate quintessence of unknown and inhuman evil. In odd contrast to the tiara's aspect was its brief and prosy history, as related by Miss Tilton. It had been pawned for a ridiculous sum at a shop in State Street in 1873 by a drunken Innsmouth man, shortly afterwards killed in a brawl. Miss Tilton was inclined to believe that it formed part of some exotic pirate horde discovered by old Captain Obed Marsh. The view was surely not weakened by the incessant offers of purchase at a high price which the Marshes began to make as soon as they knew of its presence, and which they repeated to this day, despite the Society's unvarying determination not to sell. As the good lady showed me out of the building, she assured me that the rumors of devil worship were partly justified by a peculiar secret cult which had gained force there and engulfed the Orthodox churches. It was called, she said, the Esoteric Order of Dagon, and was undoubtedly a debased, quasi-pagan thing imported from the East a century before, at a time when Innsmouth fisheries seemed to be going barren. Its persistence among the simple people was quite natural in view of the sudden and permanent return of abundantly fine fishing, and it soon came to be the greatest influence on the town. All this, to the pious Miss Tilton, formed an excellent reason for shunning the ancient town of decay and desolation. But to me, it was merely a fresh incentive. I could scarcely sleep in my room. Oh, why? As the night wore on. All right. Part 2. And I will be taking another very short break to fetch some water. Please, go grab some of your own. Stay hydrated. All right, I am back. Let's see. Okay, good. Looks like audio is fine. Part 2. Shortly before 10 the next morning, I stood with my one small valise in front of Hammond's drugstore. In the old market square waiting for the Innsmouth bus. In a few moments, a small motor coach of an extreme decrepitude and dirty gray color rattled down State Street, made a turn, and drew up the curb beside me. I felt immediately that it was the right one. The guess which the half-illegible sign on the windshield, Arkham Innsmouth, Newburyport, soon verified. There were 3 passengers, dark, unkempt men of sullen visage and somewhat youthful cast. And when the vehicle stopped, it clumsily shambled out and began walking up State Street in silent, almost furtive fashion. The driver also alighted. This, I reflected, must be the Joe Sargent mentioned by the ticket agent. And even before I had noticed any details, there spread over me this wave of spontaneous aversion, which could be neither checked nor explained. He was thin, stoop-shouldered man, not much under 6 feet tall, dressed in a shabby blue civilian clothes and wearing a frayed gray golf cap. His age was perhaps 35, but the odd, deep creases in the side of his neck made him seem older. When one did not study his dull, expressionless face. He had a narrow head, bulging, watery blue eyes that seemed never to wink, a flat nose, a receding forehead and chin. singularly undeveloped ears. As he walked towards the bus, I observed his peculiar stambling gait and saw his feet were inordinately immense. The more I studied, the more I wondered how he could buy any shoes to fit them. A certain greasiness about the fellow increased my dislike. He was evidently given to working or lounging around the fish stocks and carried with him much of that characteristic smell. Just what foreign blood was in him, I could not even guess. I was sorry when I saw that there would be no other passengers on the bus. Somehow, I did not like the idea of riding alone with this driver, but as the leaving time obviously approached, I conquered my qualms and followed the man aboard, extending to him a dollar bill and mumbling the single word, Innsmouth. At length, the decrepit vehicle started with a jerk and rattled noisily past the old brick buildings of State Street amid a cloud of vapor from the exhaust. The day was warm and sunny, but the landscape of sand, sedge grass, and stunted shrubbery became more and more desolate as we proceeded. Out the window, I could see the blue water and the shady sand of Plum Island, and we presently drew very near the beach as our narrow road veered off from the main highway to Rowley, Ipswich. At last, we lost sight of Plum Island and saw the vast expanse of the open Atlantic to our left. Our narrow course began to climb steeply, and I felt a singular sense of disquiet. And looking at the lonely crest ahead where the rotted roadway met the sky, it was as if the bus were about to keep on its ascent, leaving the sane earth altogether and merging with the unknown arcana of upper air and cryptical sky. The smell of the sea looked on, ominously implicacious, and the silent driver's bent, rigid back and narrow head became more and more hateful. As I looked at him, I saw that the back of his head was almost as hairless as his face, having only a few straggling yellow strands upon the gray, scabrous surface. Then we reached the crest and beheld the outspread valley beyond, where the Monoxent joins the sea, just north of the long line of cliffs that culminate in Kingsport Head. All my attention was captured by the nearer panorama just below me. I realized, come face to face with rumor-shadowed Innsmouth. It was a town of a wide and dense construction, yet one with a portentous dearth of visible life. The vast huddle of sagging gambrel roofs and peaked gables conveyed with pensive clearness the idea of wormy decay, and as we approached along the now descending road, I could see that many roofs had wholly caved in. Stretching inland, I saw the rusted, grass-grown line of the abandoned railway, and leaning telegraph poles now devoid of wire. Here and there, the ruins of wharves jutted out from the shore to end in indeterminate rottedness. Those furthest south seemed the most decayed, and far out to the sea, despite the high tide, I glimpsed a long, black line, scarcely raising above the water, yet carrying the suggestion of odd, latent malignancy. This, I know, must be Devil Reef. As I looked, a subtle, curious sense of beckoning seemed superadded to the grim repulsion. And oddly enough, I found this overtone more disturbing than the primary impression. As the bus reached the lower level, I began to catch the steady note of a waterfall through the unnatural stillness. The leaning, unpainted houses grew thicker, lined both sides of the road, and displayed more urban tendencies than did those we were leaving behind. The panorama ahead had contracted to a street scene, and in spots I could see where a cobblestone pavement, stretches of brick sidewalk had formerly existed. All the houses were apparently deserted, and there were occasional gaps where tumble-down chimneys and cellar walls told of buildings that had collapsed. Pervading everything was the most nauseous, fishy odor imaginable. And I was not to reach my destination without one other very strong impression of poignantly disagreeable quality. The bus had come to a sort of open concourse or radial point with churches on two sides. The bedraggled remains of a circular green in the center. And I was looking at a large pillared hall on the right-hand juncture ahead. The structure's once white paint was now gray and peeling, and the black and gold sign on the pediment was so faded that I could only with difficulty make out the words, Esoteric Order of Dagon. The door of the church basement was open, revealing a rectangle of blackness inside. And as I looked, a certain object crossed or seemed to cross the dark rectangle, burning into my brain a momentary conception of nightmare, which was all the more maddening because analysis could not show a single nightmarish quality on it. It was a living object, the first except the driver that I had seen since entering the compact part of town, and had I been in a steadier mood, I would have found nothing whatever of terror in it. Clearly, as I realized a moment later, it was a pastor, clad in peculiar vestments, doubtlessly introduced since the Order of Dagon had modified the ritual of local churches, a thing which had probably caught my first subconscious glance and supplied a touch of bizarre horror. It was a tall tiara he wore, an almost exact duplicate, the one Miss Tilton had shown me the previous evening. This, acting on my imagination, had supplied aimlessly sinister qualities to the indeterminate face and robe shambling from beneath it. A very thin sprinkling of repellent-looking youngish people now became visible on the sidewalk, lone individuals and silent knots of 2 or 3. The lower floors of the crumbling houses sometimes harbored small shops in dingy signs, and I noticed a parked truck or two as we rattled along. The sound of waterfalls became more and more distant and more distant, and presently I saw a fairly deep river gorge ahead, spanned by wide, iron-railed highway bridge beyond. Highway bridge beyond which a large square opened out. Then we rolled into the large semicircular square across the river and drew up to the right-hand side in front of a tall, cupola-crowned building with remnants of yellow paint with a half-effacing sign proclaiming it to be Gilman House. Ooh, need a drink of water. Oops. Booster keeps lifting off with my glass and falling to the table. All right. Right. Gilman House. Got it. I was glad to get out of that bus, and at once proceeded to check my valet in the shabby hotel lobby. There was only one person in sight, an elderly man without what I had come to call the Innsmouth look, and I decided not to ask him any of the questions which bothered me, remembering that odd things had been noticed in this hotel. Instead, I strolled out on the square, from which the bus had gone, and studied the scene minutely and appraisingly. For some reason or other, I chose to make my first inquiries at a chain grocery whose personnel was not likely to be native to Innsmouth. I found a solitary boy of about 17 in charge. He was pleased to note the brightness and affability which promised cheerfully information. He seemed exceptionally eager to talk, and as soon as I gathered that he did not like the place, its fishy smell, or its furtive people, his family did not like him to work in Innsmouth, but the chain had transferred him there, and he did not wish to give up his job. There was, he said, no public library or chamber of commerce in Innsmouth, but I could probably find my way about. The street I had come down was Federal. West of that were the fine old residence streets, Broad, Washington, Lafayette, and Adams. And east of it were shoreward slums. Certain spots were almost forbidden territory, and he had learned at considerable cost. One must not, for example, linger much around the Marsh refinery, or around any of the still used churches, or around the pillared Order of Dagon Hall at New Church Green. Those churches were very odd, all violently disavowed by their respective denominations elsewhere, and apparently used the queerest kind of ceremonials and clerical vestments. As for the Innsmouth people, the youth hardly knew what to make of them. their appearance especially, those staring, unwinking eyes which one never saw shut, was certainly shocking enough. Their voices were disgusting. It was awful to hear them chatting in their churches at night, especially during their main festivals or revivals, which fell twice a year on April 30th and October 31st. They were very fond of water and swam a great deal in both river and harbor. Swimming races out to Devil's Reef were common, and everyone in sight seemed well able to share in this arduous sport. It would be no use, my informant said, to ask natives anything about the place. The only one who would talk was the very aged but normal-looking man who lived at the poorhouse on the north rim of town and spent his time walking around or lounging around the fire station. This hoary character, Zadok Allen, was 96 years old and seemed somewhat touched in the head. Besides being the town drunkard, he was a strange, furtive creature who constantly looked over his shoulder as if afraid of something, and when sober could not be persuaded to talk at all with strangers. He was, however, unable to resist any offer of his favorite poison, and once drunk, would furnish the most astonishing fragments of whispered reminiscence. After all, though, little useful data could be gained from him since his stories were all insane. Incomplete hints of impossible marvels and horrors which could have no source save his own distorted fantasy. No one ever believed him, but the natives did not like him to drink and talk with any stranger, and it was not always safe to be seen questioning him. It was probably from him that some of the wildest popular whispers and delusions were derived. The Marshes, together with the other three gently bred families of the town, the Waits, the Gilmans, and the Elliots, were all very retiring? Sorry, having trouble processing that. I don't know why that word threw me off so much. They lived in immense houses along Washington Street, and several were reputed to harbor in concealment certain kinsfolk whose personal aspects forbade public view, and whose deaths had been reported and recorded, warning me that most of these street signs were down. The youth drew to my benefit a rough but ample and painstaking sketch map of the town's salient features. After a moment's study, I felt sure that it would be of great help, and pocketed it with profuse thanks. Thus began my systematic, thorough, half-bewildered tour of Innsmouth's narrow, shadowed, blighted ways. Crossing the bridge and turning towards the roar of the lower falls, I passed close to the Marsh refinery, which seemed oddly free of the noise of industry. This building stood on the steep river bluff near a bridge, and an open confluence of streets which I took to be the earliest civic center displaced after the revolution by the present town square. Crossing the gorge on Main Street, I struck a region of utter, uh, sorry, I struck a region of utter desertion, which somehow made me shudder. Collapsing huddles of gamble roofs formed a jagged and fantastic skyline, which rose the ghoulish, decrepitated steeple of an ancient church. Fish Street was as deserted as Maine, though it differed in having many brick and stone warehouses still in excellent shape. Water Street was almost its duplicate, save that there were great seaward gaps where wharves had been. Not a living thing did I see, except the scattered fishermen on the distant breakwater, and not a sound did I hear save the lapping of the harbor tide and the roar of the falls in the Minnoxen. I kept north along Main Martin and turned inland, crossing Federal Street safely north of the Green, and entered the decayed, patrician neighborhood of the Northern Board, Washington, Lafayette, and Adams Streets. Following Washington Street towards the river, I now faced a zone of former industry and commerce. Noting the ruins of a factory ahead, and seeing others with the traces of an old railway station and covered railway bridge beyond up the gorge on my right. The uncertain bridge now before me was posted with a warning sign, but I took the risk and crossed again to the south bank, where traces of life reappeared. Furtive, shambling creatures stared cryptically in my direction, and more normal faces eyed me coldly and curiously. Innsmouth was rapidly becoming intolerable, and I turned down Main Street towards the square in the hopes of getting some vehicle to take me to Arkham before the still distant starting time of the sinister bus. It was then that I saw the tumble-down fire station on my left, and noticed the red-faced, bushy-beard, watery-eyed old man in nondescript rags who sat on a bench in front of it, talking with a pair of unkempt but not abnormal-looking fishermen. This, of course, must be Zadok Allen, the half-crazed, licorice, non-agenarian, whose tales of old Innsmouth and its shadow were so hideous and incredible. Alright. That takes us to part 3. I am going to take another short break. I will be right back. And I am back. I had to look up Aegean. I've never seen that word. Means 90 years old. Never heard it used before. I guess it's like septuagenarian and octogenarian, but whatever. Alright, part 3. I had been assured that the old man could do nothing but hint at wild, disjointed, and incredible legends. And I had been warned that the natives made it unsafe to be seen talking with him. Yet the thought of this aged witness to the town's decay, with memories going back to the early days, ships and factories, was a lure that no amount of reason could make me resist. Curiosity flared up beyond sense and caution. My youthful egotism In my youthful egotism, I fancied I might be able to sift a nucleus of real history from the confused, extravagant outpour I would probably extract with the aid of whiskey. A quart bottle of such was easily, though not cheaply, obtained from the rear of a dingy variety store in the square of Elliott Street. Re-entering the square, I saw that luck was with me, for shuffling out of Payne Street around the corner of the Gilman house, I glimpsed nothing less than the tall, lean, tattered form of old Doc Allen himself. In accordance with my plan, I attracted his attention by brandishing my newly purchased bottle, and soon realized that he had begun to shuffle listlessly after me as I turned into Waite Street, on my way to the most deserted region I could think of. Before I reached Main Street, I could hear a faint and wheezy, "Hey, mister!" behind me, and I presently allowed the old man to catch up and take copious pulls from the quart bottle. I began putting out feelers as we walked along to Water Street and turned southward amidst the omnipresent desolation and crazily tilted ruins, but found that the aged tongue did not loosen as quickly as I expected. At length I saw a grass-grown opening towards the sea beyond crumbled brick walls, with the weedy length of an earth and masonry wharf projecting beyond. Piles of moss-covered stone near the water promised tolerable seats, and the scene was sheltered from all possible view by a ruined warehouse on the north. About 4 hours remained for conversation if I were to catch the 8 o'clock coach for Arkham, and I began to dole out more liquor to the ancient tippler. Meanwhile, eating my own frugal lunch. In my donations, I was careful not to overshoot the mark, for I did not wish Zadok's Vinus Gregarious to pass into stupor. After an hour of furtive taciturnity, showed signs of disappearing, and something or other had caused his wandering gaze to light on the low, distant line of Devil Reef. Then, showing plainly and almost fascinatingly of the waves, he bent towards me, took my coat lapel, and hissed out some hints that could not be mistaken. "There's where it all began. That cursed place of all wickedness, where the deep water starts. Gate o' hell. Sheer drop down to a bottom no sound like Intech. Old Captain Obed done it. Him that found out about more'n good for him in the South Sea Island. Nothing was nobody like Captain Obed, old limb, old Satan." I can mind him telling about burn parts and calling all folks stupid for going to Christian meetings and bearing their burdens meek and lowly. Says they're or get better gods like some of 'em folks in Injures. Gods as bring 'em good fishin', return for sacrifice, and really answer folks' prayers. Mad Elliot, his first mate, talked a lot too, only he was aging. Folks don't like heathen things. told about an island east of Othiwar, where there is a lot of stone ruins older anybody knew anything about. Kinda like on Panape in the Carolines, but with carving a face that looked like big statues on Easter Island. There was a little volcanic isle near there too, where there was other ruins with different carvings. Ruins all wore away like they'd been under the sea once, and with pictures of awful monsters all over them. Well, sir, Matt, he says the natives round there had all the fish they could catch and supported bracelets and armlets and head rig. Made 'em out of a queer kind of gold covered with pictures of monsters, just like the ones carved on the ruins on the little isles. Sort of fish frog, or frog-like fishes that were drawn in all kinds of positions like they were human beings. Nobody could get a route where they got all the stuff, and all the other natives wondered how they managed to find fish in plenty when the very next isle had lean pickings. Matt, he got to wondering too, and so did Captain Obed. Obed, he notices, besides that, a lot of handsome young folk can drop out of sight for good from year to year, and when there weren't many old folks around. And he thinks some of them folks look darn queer even for Kanyakes. It took Obed to get the truth about him from the heathens. Wouldn't know how he done it, but he began by trading for their gold-like things they wore. Asked him where they came from and if he could get more, and finally wormed the story about if from the old chief Walake, they called him. Nobody but Obed ever believed the old Yellow Devil, but Captain could read folks like they was books. No one ever believed me now when I tell him. I don't suppose you will, young feller. So, come to look at ye. You have got them sharp reading eyes like Obed had. The old man's whispers grew fainter, and I found myself shuddering at the terrible and sincere pretentiousness of his intonation, even though I knew his tale could be nothing but a drunken fantasy. Oof, need a drink after that. Moving on to some iced tea. Huh. Well, Sir Obed, he learnt that there are things on this earth, as most of our folks heard about, and wouldn't believe them if they did hear. Seems the Kanyakes were sacrificing heaps of their young men and maidens to some kind of god thing that lived under the sea, and getting all kinds of favors in return. They met the things on the little isle with the queer ruins, and it seems them awful pictures of frog fish monsters were supposed to be pictures of the things. Maybe they were the kind of critters as got all the mermaid stories and such started. They had all kinds of cities on the sea bottom, and this island was heaved up from there. Seems they were some of the things alive in the stone building when the island came up, sodded to the surface. That's how the Kanyakis got wind they were down there. Made sign talk as good as they got over being secret and east up bargain afore long. Them things like human sacrifices had 'em ages before, but lost track of the upper world after a time. What they done to the victims, it ain't for me to say, but I guess Obed wasn't none too sharp about asking. But it was alright with the heathens, 'cause they'd been a hard time and was desperate about everything. They give us a number of... They give a certain number of young folk to the sea thing. Quick every year. May Eve and Halloween. Regular as could be. But give some carved knickknacks they made. What the things agreed to give in return was plenty of fish. They drove 'em up from the sea. And a few gold-like things there on them. When it come time to Martin with the toad-looking fishies, the Kanyakis kinda balked, but finally they learned something as put a new face on the matter. Seems that human folks have got a kinda relation to certain water beasts, that everything alive come out of the water once and only needs a little change to go back again. Them things told Kanyakis that if they brought mixed bloods, they'd be children as and look human at first, but later turn more and more like the things. So finally, they take to the water and just the main lot of the things down there. And this is the most important part. Young fella, them as turned to fish things and went into the water would never die. Them things never die except when killed violent. Oh, sir, it seems by the time Obed known, them islanders, they were all full of fish blood from them deep water things. When they got old and began to show it, they were kept hidden until they felt like taking to the water and quitting the place. Some was more checked than others, and some never did change quite enough to take to the water, but mostly they turned out just the way them things said. Them as was born more like things changed early, but them as was nearly human sometimes stayed on the island till they were past 70, though they usually go down under for trial trips afore that. Folks as had took to the water generally come back a good deal to visit. So was a man under often talking to his own 5 times great-grandfather, who'd left the dry land a couple 100 years or so afore. Everybody got about out the island of dying except in canoe wars with other islanders, or sacrifices to sea gods down below, or from snakebite, plague, or gallon ailments or something before they could take to the water, but simply looked forward to the kind of change that one a bit horrible after a while. They thought what they got was well worth all they had to give up, and I guess Obed kinda came to think the same himself when he chewed over the old Walaka's idea a bit. Walaka, though, he was one of the few as hadn't got none of the fish blood, being of royal line that intermarried royal lines of other islands. Walaka gave him a funny kinda thingamajig made out of lead or something that he said would bring up the fish things from any place in the water where they might make a nest of them. The idea was to drop it down with the right kind of prayer and such. Walaka allowed, as was the things was scattered all over the world, so anybody that looked about could find a nest and bring 'em up if they wanted. Matt, he didn't like this business at all, and wanted Obed to keep away from the island, but the captain was sharp for gain, and found he could get them gold-like things so cheap it'd pay him to make a specialty of them. Things went on that way for years, and Obed got enough of them gold-like stuff to make him start the refinery and wait old run-down Fulham Mill. Well, come about 38, when I was 7 years old, Obed, he found that island where people all wipe out them voyages. Seems the other islanders had got wind of what was going on and took matters into their own hands. Suppose they must have had, after all, some old magic signs, as the sea things was not the only things in days was to be afraid of. Not telling what any of them old Tanyakis would chance to get a halt of when the sea bottom throws up some island with ruins older than the deluge. Pious curses. Didn't leave nothing standing on either. The main island nor the little volcanic islet, except what parts of the ruins was too big to knock down. Ooh, need another drink of water. This voice is not easy to do for me. That naturally hit Obed pretty hard, seeing as his normal trade was doing very poor. It hit the whole of Innsmouth too, because in seafaring days what profited master of the ship generally profited the crew proportionate. Most of the folk around town took the hard times kinda sheep-like in regard, and resigned, but they was in a bad shape because the fishing was petering out about the mills, doing pretty well. Then there's the time Obed, he began a cursing at the folks for being dull sheep and praying to a Christian heaven, as don't help 'em none. He told them he knew of folks as prayed to gods that gave you something when you really need it. Said if enough of men stand by him, he could maybe get a hold the starting power, says, and bring plenty of fish and quite a bit of gold. Here the old man faltered and mumbled, and lapsed into a moody and apprehensive silence, glancing nervously over his shoulder and then turning back to stare fascinatedly at the distant black reef. When I spoke to him, he did not answer, so I knew I would have to let him finish the bottle. He licked his nose. He licked its nose and slipped it into his pocket, then began to nod and whispered softly to himself. I bent close to catch any article words he might utter, and thought I saw a sardonic smile behind the stained bushy whiskers. Yes, he was really forming words, and I could grasp a fair portion of them. Or Matt always was edging it again. Tried to line up the folks on his side and had long talks. The preachers, no use. They ran the congressional person out of town, and when the Methodist fella quit, never did see Resolve Babcock, but Baptist person again. Jovie. I was a mighty little critter, but when I heard what I heard and saw what I seen, Dagon, Nashville, Beelzebub, golden calf and the idol, and the Philistines, Babylonish abominations, and man. He stopped again, and from the look in his watery blue eyes, I feared he was close to stupor after all, and when I gently shook his shoulder, he turned on me with astonishing alertness and snapped out of his obscure phrases. Don't believe me? Hey. And just tell me, young fella, why Captain Obed, 20-year-old other folk, or 20-odd other folk, used to row about Devil Reef in the dead o' night and chant things so loud you can hear 'em all over town when the wind was right. Tell me that, eh? Tell me why Captain Obed was always dropping heavy things down into the deep water to the other side of the reef, where the bottom shoots down like a cliff-looking kind of sound. Tell me what he done with that funny-shaped lead thingamajig Wallachie gave him, eh, boy? The watery blue eyes were almost savage and maniacal now, and the dirty white beard bristled electrically. Old Zadok probably saw me shrink back, for he began to cackle evilly. Beginning to see, eh? How about the night they took my pa's ship glass up to the Capello and heeded the reef a bristling thick with shapes that drove off quick soon. The moon is Obed and folk was doored, but the shapes drove off the far side of the deep water and never come up. I like to be the little shaver come up to the Capella while watching shapes, as weren't human shapes. The old man was getting hysterical, and I began to shiver with a nameless alarm. He laid a gnarled claw on my shoulder, and it seemed to me it was shaking was not altogether that of mirth. Suppose one night you see something heavy heaved off in Obed's dory beyond the reef, and then learn next day a young fella was missing from home, Hey? Did anybody ever see Hyde or Harem Gilman again? Did they? Nick Pierce? Lucy Waite? Abram Shorthwick? And Harry Grissom? Hey, hey. Well, sir, that was the time Obed began to get on his feet again. Folks see his 3 daughters wearing gold-like things was nobody seen from before. And smoke started coming out the refinery chimney. Other folks was prospering too. Fish began to swarm into the harbor fit to kill. And heavens knows what sized cargoes we began to ship about to Newburyport, Arkham, and Boston. Was then Obed got the old branches railroad put through. Remember, I ain't saying Obed was set on having things just like they were on Kanaki Island. I don't think he aimed at first to do no mixin', nor raise no young'uns to take to the water and turn into fishies with eternal life. He wanted them gold things, and he was willing to pay heavy, and I guess the others was satisfied for a while. I'm in 46. Town does something, looking and thinking for herself. Too many folks missing. Too much wild preaching at meetings of a Sunday. Too much talk about the reef. Guess it was done by telling Selectman Maury what I seen from the Capello. There was a party down one night, followed Obed, crowded around the reef. I heard shots betwixt the dories. Next day, Obed, 22 others was in jail. Everybody a wondering just what put and jet what charge and could get old. Anyone looked ahead a couple of weeks later, and nobody'd have thrown into the sea for long. Zadok was showing signs of fright and exhaustion, and I let him keep silence for a while, though glancing apprehensively at my watch. The tide had turned and was coming in now, and the sound of waves seemed to arouse him. That awful night. I seed. I was up on the Capello, hordes of them, swarms of them, all over the reef and swimming up the harbor to the Minoxet. Happened to the streets of Innsmouth that night. They rattled our doors, but Pa wouldn't open. Then he clambered around the kitchen, wanted to find his musket, find Selectman Maury, and see what he could do. Mounds of the dead and the dying, shots and screaming, shouting in Old Square and Old Town Square, and New Church Green, jail thrown open, proclamation, trees, and called it the plague when folks came around, found half our people missing. Nobody left but them, as Unjin with Obed and the things, or else kept quiet. Nobody heard my pa no more. The old man was panting and perspiring profusely. His grip on my shoulder tightened. Everything cleaned up in the morning, but there was traces. Obed kind of take charge and says things gonna be changed. Others will worship with us in meantime, and starting houses here got to entertain guests. They want to mix like they done with Kenyakis, and for one, didn't feel bound to stop them. Far gone was Obed, just like a crazy man on the subject. He says they bring us fish and treasure and should have what they're hankering after. Nothing was to be different on the outside. Only way we kept shy as strangers if we know what they could for us. We all had to take the oath of Dagon, and later on there was a second and third oath that some of us took. Them as a special and get special rewards, gold and such. No use balking, for there was millions of them down there. They'd rather not start rising and wiping out humankind, but if they could give away and forced to, they could do a lot towards just that. Yield up enough sacrifice, savage knickknacks and harborage in the town when they wanted it, and they would well enough, and they'd let well enough alone. All in band of the fateful order of Dagon, and the children should never die, and go back to Mother Hydra and Father Dagon, while we all came out. Yeah. Cthulhu Fatagan, Tingwali, Allah, Cthulhu Raye, Allah, Hog. Old man Zadok began to moan now, and tears were coursing down his channeled cheeks into the depths of his beard. God, what I have seen since 15 years old. Main. Pants. Folks as was missing, and them to kill themselves. It's told things in Arkham or Ipswich or such places was all crazy, like you're recalling me right now, but God, what I had seen, they'd kill me long ago for what I know. Only I took the first and second oaths of Dagon, offered Obed. So was protected unless a jury of them could prove I told things, knowing it deliberate. But I wouldn't have taken the third oath. I'd have died rather than take that. It got worse around the Civil War time when children born since 64 began to grow up. Some of them, that is. I was afeared. Never did no praying after the awful night, and never see one of them. One of them close to in all my life. That is never no full-blood one. Arbus Marsh let run the refinery now. Is Obed's grandson by his first wife, son of Boniface, his eldest son, but his mother was another one of them, as wasn't never seen outdoors. Right now, Arbinus is about change. Can't shut his eyes no more. And is all about the shape. They say he still wears clothes, but will take to the water soon. The sound of the incoming tide was now very insistent, and little by little it seemed to change the old man's mood from maudlin tearfulness, a watchful fear. He would pause now and then, renew those nervous glances over his shoulder or out towards the reef, and despite the wild absurdity of his tale, I could not help begin to share his vague apprehensiveness. Zadok now grew chiller and seemed to be trying to whip up his courage with louder speech. Oh geez, this part has been going some time. I'm actually going to have to mark right here on my page and take a quick break. I will see you all in a few minutes. And we're back. Alright, let's pick up where we left off. Hey, why don't you say something? How you like to be living in a town like this, with everything a-rotten and a-dying, and boarded up monsters crawling and bleating and barking and whooping around, black cellars and attics every way you turn. Well, sir, let me tell you, this ain't the worst. Zadok was really screaming now, and the mad frenzy of his voice disturbed me more than I care to own. See, don't set there staring at me with them eyes. I can tell Obed Marsh he's in hell, and he's gonna stay there. In hell, I say. Can't get me. I haven't done nothing, nor told anybody nothing. Oh, you young fella. Well, even if I haven't told nobody nothing, on to now. You just sat here to listening to me, boy. This is what I ain't told nobody. I say I don't get to do no praying after that night, but I found things about just the same. You want to know where the real horror is? Well, it's this. Ain't what them fish devils he's done, but what they're gonna do. They're bringing things up about where they come from into town, been doing for years and slacking up lately. Them houses north of the river betwixt the water and Main Street is full of them. Devils ain't ring. When they get ready, I say, when they get ready, ever you tell of a Shoggoth. Hey, didn't you hear me? I tell ye, I know what them things be. Seen one night. The hideous suddenness of inhuman fright in the old man's shriek almost made me faint. His eyes looked past me towards the melodious sea, were positively staring from his head. Sorry. His eyes looked past me towards the melodious sea, were positively starting from his head, where his face was a mask of fear worthy of Greek tragedy. His bony claw dug monstrously into my shoulder, and he made no motion as I turned my head to look at whatever he had glimpsed. There was nothing I could see, only the incoming tide, with perhaps one set of ripples more local than the long line of breakers. But now Zadok was shaking me, and I turned back to watch the melting of that fear-frozen face into a chaos of twitching eyelids and mumbling gums. Presently, his voice came back, albeit as a trembling whisper. Get out of here! Get out of here! They seen. Get out for your life. Don't wait for nothing. They know now. Run for it. Quick. Out of the town. Another heavy wave dashed against the loosening masonry of bygone wharf and charged the mad ancient's whisper into another inhuman blood-curdling scream. Before I could recover my scattered wits, he had relaxed his clutch over my shoulder and dashed wildly inland towards the street, reeling northward around the ruined warehouse wall. I glanced back at the sea, but there was nothing there. And when I reached Water Street and looked along it towards the north, there was no remaining trace of Zadok Allen. All right. We now are on part 4. Okay. Let's see here. How are we doing on time? About 2 hours in. Yeah, part 4. I think this is a pretty good place to stop. This is about halfway into the book, a little past halfway. Let me take us out of this room, bring us back to our lobby. Oof. It feels like it's been so long since I've talked this much. Thank you very much for coming by, dreamers. Not that some of you had a choice. Your dreams are now inexorably linked to this place, and I will be visiting often. Thank you very much to everyone else who has made these streams possible. And once again, to everyone who's dropped something in the chat. It was nice to speak to you all. Let's see here. This is probably a good time to go over my stream schedule again. Let's see here. We had our reading stream today, and tomorrow at 8 p.m. we will be playing Darkest Dungeon. On Thursday at 8 will be World of Horror. Those times are, of course, EST. That's all of my times are. Friday at 10 p.m. we will be finishing The Shadow over Innsmouth. Wait, did I say that right? On Friday at 10 p.m. EST, we will be finishing Shadow over Innsmouth. On Saturday, the 20th, at 5 p.m. EST, I will be doing a reading of the short story from Arknight's Children of Ursus. It was very nice to stream. I haven't been able to do this for over a month now. In fact, it's about 2 months exactly since I last streamed. It feels weird. It feels very weird. Well, anyways, if you had fun tonight, please drop a follow if you haven't, and feel free to follow me on Discord or Twitch. I have my socials down below. If you were following me on Blue Sky, I think I've made the decision at this point to sort of abandon Blue Sky. I haven't been getting much traction there lately, not as much as Twitter. But yes, thank you everyone again, and I'll see you tomorrow. Sweet dreams.